The first time I met him, there was this strange, unexplainable pull, like a magnet I hadn't expected but couldn't resist. I remember glancing across the table at the little cafe downtown, sunlight catching the streaks in his hair, and feeling a flutter I hadn't felt in a long time. It was that simple chemistry that made the nerves in my stomach coil and uncoil, the kind that makes you overthink your words and laugh too loudly at jokes that aren't even that funny. There's a vulnerability in first encounters, a raw hope that maybe, just maybe, this person could be someone you want in your life. Our conversations flowed easier than I anticipated. At first, it was the usual surface stuff: the weather, our favorite spots in the city, stories from work, but soon we dipped into more personal territory. I found myself opening up about things I usually keep guarded. The fact that I have a child, my routines, little quirks I hide from the world. And he listened, not just nodding along, but actually taking it in, asking questions that made me feel seen. It was intoxicating, being around someone who made me feel like my experiences mattered, like my life had context beyond the daily grind. We decided to spend a night at a hotel downtown. There's something undeniably romantic about a cityscape at night, the way lights shimmer across the ocean, casting reflections that dance on your skin, the salty breeze that somehow smells like freedom. It wasn't just a hotel stay. It was a chance to escape our routines, to live in a bubble of just us for a few hours. I had been hesitant at first because, naturally, there's a vulnerability in sleeping somewhere new with someone new. But his presence was comforting, a gentle assurance that I could relax. I remember the room vividly. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, giving us a panoramic view of the coastline, waves crashing softly against the shore. It was a small, silent moment of intimacy, one that felt significant because it wasn't rushed. It was just us, sitting on the edge of the bed, sharing stories, laughter echoing softly against the walls. There was a sense of freedom, like we were allowed to exist in our own little world without judgment or expectation. He's 3 years older than me, and for some reason, I carried this unspoken belief that I was the more mature one. I suppose it comes from being a parent, from handling responsibilities that forced me to grow faster than my peers. But I knew, even in the back of my mind, that I could be wrong. Age and experience don't always translate to maturity, and sometimes the opposite is true. I liked to think I had a handle on life, that I knew myself better than most. But part of me acknowledged that this was just the beginning of understanding him more anyone. Really, still, there's a layer of excitement in uncertainty. There's something almost cinematic about these early days, walking together without knowing the road ahead, stealing glances when the other isn't looking, sharing private jokes that feel bigger than the world around us. Every text, every call, every little smile felt amplified, like the universe had conspired to make these moments feel more significant than they probably were. But of course, that's the tricky part with first impressions. They're powerful, seductive even, but they don't tell the whole story. People put up a persona for a while, especially where I'm from. You learn quickly that initial charm can be misleading. It takes time to peel back the layers, to see the real person underneath the carefully curated exterior. And I was willing to give him that time more, at least. I thought I was. Our conversations in the hotel room weren't just flirtatious. They were revealing. I told him about my child, about balancing work and parenthood, about dreams I still nurtured despite the chaos of daily life. He shared about his past, the things that shaped him, his routines, his ambitions. It felt honest, intimate, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine what a longer journey with him might look like. The night stretched lazily, each hour infused with warmth and laughter, and when it was finally time to part ways the next morning, there was a strange reluctance to let go. I could feel it in his touch, the lingering glance, the soft, almost hesitant words he whispered before leaving. That kind of connection is rare, fleeting, and it's addictive. I told myself to savor it, to enjoy the novelty without But of course, that's easier said than done when your mind has a tendency to catalogue every interaction, every word, every nuance, even after he left. I found myself replaying moments in my head. The way he smiled when I mentioned something trivial, the way his voice softened when he listened to me, the way our hands brushed as we moved through the small hotel room. It's a strange sensation, feeling like someone has already embedded themselves in your thoughts before anything serious has even begun. That's the thrill and danger of new beginnings. They're intoxicating and fragile all at once. And then there's the awareness of the differences that exist between us. He doesn't have children, and I do. He hasn't had the weight of responsibility that comes with parenthood, the constant need to think beyond oneself. Sometimes I wonder if he truly understands what it means to have a life intertwined with another being, someone entirely dependent on you for stability and guidance. But again, I told myself to withhold judgment, to let experiences reveal the truth rather than assumptions. For a little while, everything felt effortless. We fell into a rhythm, the kind of rhythm where being around someone feels natural, even comforting. He didn't try to overshadow my life or invalidate my experiences. He seemed genuinely interested, asking questions that made me think and laugh in equal measure. That's what made the eventual cracks all the more jarring, the contrast between the person I thought I was getting to know and the reality that slowly emerged. But first, I allowed myself to live in that bubble, to relish the rare sensation of being with someone whose presence felt like a bomb. There's a delicate dance in early dating, the balance between wanting to know someone fully and wanting to preserve the magic of not knowing too much yet. Every laugh, every shared glance, every simple gesture felt magnified, as if the universe had slowed time just so I could savor it. Of course, hindsight has a way of painting things differently. At the moment, I was captivated, blinded by the rush of novelty, the thrill of new affection. There's an innocence in those early days, a raw, unfiltered emotion that makes you overlook the smaller red flags. But as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. And it didn't take long before one of those details began to gnaw at me. The first seed of doubt planted quietly, yet unmistakably, in my mind. It started with subtle things, a comment here, a hesitation there, but nothing concrete enough to alarm me. Just the occasional pang of unease that made me pause and consider the dynamics at play. Early attraction can be deceiving, masking issues that might later define compatibility. Still, I told myself to be patient, to give him the space to show his true self. Because I knew the first chapter of any relationship is rarely the full story. And so, I lingered in that moment, savoring the connection while remaining cautiously aware that charm can only carry a person so far. I reminded myself to watch, to notice, to observe without immediate judgment. There's a delicate balance between hope and realism, between wanting to believe in someone and needing to protect your own heart. I was navigating that balance carefully, savoring the highs while bracing for the inevitable lows that life and relationships inevitably bring. The hotel stay had ended, but the feeling lingered, the warmth, the intimacy, the connection that had grown in those few hours. I carried it with me, replaying conversations, remembering small touches, and marveling at how quickly someone could make a place, a moment, feel so alive. It's a peculiar mix of vulnerability and exhilaration, opening yourself to someone new while knowing that the story could end at any moment. I knew then that I wanted to explore this, to see where it might go, even as I remained conscious of the unknowns. He was older, experienced, charming, and yet I had to remind myself that life isn't only about charm. There's depth, maturity, independence, and decisiveness, qualities that I valued and hoped would reveal themselves as we spent more time together. The first chapter was just the prologue, and I was eager to see what the next pages would bring, unaware that the plot twist was closer than I imagined. At first, the little quirks I noticed in him felt endearing. He had this nervous habit of tapping his fingers against his coffee mug when he was deep in thought, a subtle tremor in his voice when he laughed too loudly, and an almost childlike excitement when talking about simple pleasures like sunsets or favorite meals. I thought maybe that was just part of his charm, a reflection of the playfulness that made him so easy to be around. But slowly, the charm began to blur with something I couldn't quite name, something that made my stomach twist in ways that weren't pleasant. It started with the casual way he spoke about asking his mum's permission for things innocuous at first, a throwaway line that might have slipped past me if I hadn't been listening closely. He said it like it was completely normal, and for a moment, I forced myself to shrug it off. Maybe this was just his family dynamic, I reasoned. Everyone has their own way of interacting with family. But as I replayed his words in my head, a strange discomfort began to take root. I thought, wait, why does a 30-year-old man need permission from his mother for something that should be entirely his choice? It felt unusual, foreign even, and yet he seemed completely unaware of how it might appear from the outside. Our second hotel stay brought this unease into sharper focus. He had suggested we spend 2 nights together downtown, the same way we had before, but this time his words landed differently. My mom doesn't want me treating you to 2 nights, so we'll only do 1, he said casually, almost expecting me to nod along. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. Did I just hear that correctly? At 30 years old, he still felt the need to consult his mother about adult decisions, about sharing experiences with someone he was dating. The absurdity of it hit me like a slap I hadn't anticipated. I tried to unpack it, to understand. Maybe it was his way of showing respect to his family, a cultural nuance I wasn't fully aware of. Or maybe he genuinely didn't realize how dependent he seemed. Either way, the initial spark of excitement I had felt in our early encounters began to dim. There was a subtle, but undeniable, shift in how I viewed him. He was charming, yes, but there was this undercurrent of immaturity that I couldn't ignore. I began to reflect on my own life, and the stark contrast became glaring. At 27, I don't ask my mother for permission to make decisions about my personal life dates. Hotel stays, even matters as significant as relationships or finances, are mine to navigate. The independence I've fought for, the boundaries I've established, suddenly felt like a lens through which I could clearly see his behavior. It wasn't just about the hotel stay. It was about the lack of autonomy, the inability to act for himself without seeking approval from someone who shouldn't be dictating the choices of an adult. That realization brought the first real sense of the ick. It's a term I use lightly, but here it fit perfectly. That sudden, visceral feeling of discomfort, the instinctive reaction that something isn't quite right. It's not just disappointment or confusion. It's a deep, bodily response that tells you your boundaries are being challenged in ways that make you question your attraction. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that everyone has quirks and family dynamics. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. I wondered about other aspects of his life. If he needed his mother's permission for a hotel stay, what about bigger decisions? Was he the kind of man who would consult her before proposing marriage, before having kids? Would he ask her if he could stay over at my house? The thoughts made me chuckle nervously, but beneath the humor was a seed of real concern. It wasn't just strange, it was a red flag, a symbol of a lack of independence, of someone who perhaps hadn't fully transitioned into adulthood in the ways I valued. The conversations we had afterward were revealing, though unintentionally so. He spoke casually about obligations to his family, about respecting his mother's wishes, as though it were a natural extension of life. I wanted honesty, real, raw honesty, not explanations that softened the truth or excuses that masked immaturity. I found myself asking, not out loud but internally, how much of him was genuine, and how much was a product of familial influence that seemed to govern even the most personal aspects of his adult life. It wasn't just the permission, issue it was a pattern that emerged. The way he hesitated when making simple plans, the need for validation before acting, the subtle deference to someone outside our relationship. Each instance added weight to my growing doubts. It's one thing to respect family, to honor their opinions. It's another to let them dictate your life in a way that undermines your autonomy. That distinction became impossible to ignore. I thought back to the early days, to the hotel with the ocean view, to the laughter and connection we shared, and suddenly a layer of disappointment settled over those memories. The charm was still there, but it was tinted with a new awareness, a realization that perhaps the man I was drawn to wasn't the man I thought he could be. The excitement that had filled me with hope now carried a shadow, a hesitancy I hadn't experienced before. I tried to reconcile the two sides of him, the affectionate, attentive partner who made me feel seen, and the dependent, hesitant adult whose choices were filtered through someone else's approval. It was a dichotomy that made my emotions unstable. I found myself questioning every interaction, wondering if I had missed other signs, if there were additional areas where his independence or lack thereof would emerge unexpectedly. This inner conflict forced me to examine my own standards. What did I truly need in a partner? Someone charming but immature, or someone capable of making their own decisions, standing by their choices, and sharing life as an equal? The answer seemed obvious, but emotions complicate clarity. I still cared about him, still wanted to believe in the spark we had, but I couldn't ignore the reality of his dependence. And so, the days following that conversation were a mix of reflection and hesitation. I found myself analyzing every word, every gesture, every nuance of his behavior. I asked myself whether this was a temporary phase, a habit he would grow out of, or a fundamental aspect of his personality that I couldn't overlook. The more I thought, the clearer it became. This wasn't a small quirk. It was a significant indicator of how he approached life. I also noticed a subtle shift in my own behavior. I became more cautious, less willing to invest emotionally in ways that left me vulnerable. The carefree joy of early connection was tempered by the knowledge that I might be compromising my values or tolerating a dynamic I found uncomfortable. That awareness changed the way I engaged with him, the way I spoke, the boundaries I set, and even the way I thought about our future interactions. What was most striking, though, was how quickly the perception of him changed in my mind. The person I had been captivated by now seemed different, almost unrecognizable. That's the nature of initial charm, can obscure flaws until a moment like this illuminates them, until reality seeps in and reveals the true texture of someone's character. My attraction didn't vanish, but it became complicated, tinged with caution and doubt. I realized that attraction alone isn't enough to sustain a relationship. Connection, chemistry, and shared moments matter, but they cannot compensate for fundamental differences in maturity, independence, and values. That realization was sobering but necessary. It was a moment of clarity, the kind that hurts yet saves you from bigger disappointment down the road, and so I took stock of what I wanted moving forward. I needed honesty, decisiveness, and someone capable of making choices without constant oversight. I needed a partner who could navigate adult life without relying on parental permission for every decision. The hotel incident, small as it may have seemed to him, had become a litmus test, revealing truths that I couldn't ignore if I wanted a relationship that was healthy, balanced, and fulfilling. By the end of those reflections, I knew I had to confront the feelings the ick had awakened. It wasn't just discomfort. It was an intuitive warning, a signal that my boundaries and expectations were being challenged in ways that made me question compatibility. I had to honor that feeling, to give it the weight it deserved, because ignoring it would mean compromising my values, my independence, and ultimately my well-being. I remember the moment the ick fully set in, a realization that seemed to hit me with the clarity of a lightning strike. He had casually mentioned that his mum didn't want him treating me to 2 nights at the hotel, and in that instant, everything shifted. The warmth I felt during our early encounters, the playful teasing, the shared laughter, the gentle touches, was suddenly overshadowed by a strange mix of disbelief and discomfort. How could a grown man, 30 years old, let his mother dictate something as simple as spending 2 nights together? The absurdity of it was almost comical. Yet underneath that humor lay a gnawing unease that I couldn't ignore. It's hard to explain the ick to someone who hasn't felt it. It's not just disappointment, annoyance, or irritation. It's physical, visceral, even a tightening in your chest, a creeping nausea, a shift in the way your mind evaluates every interaction. It's a sudden, irrevocable understanding that the person you were excited about, the one you imagined sharing experiences and intimacy with, has a fundamental trait that clashes with your core values. And for me, that trait was immaturity manifested through dependency. I began to question everything I had assumed about him, everything I had allowed myself to believe during those first few dates. The charm, the attentiveness, the initial connection, they were still there, but they had lost their innocence. They now existed alongside this unsettling realization that he might not be capable of making independent decisions, that he might allow external influences to control aspects of his adult life that should be entirely his own. That thought made me recoil slightly, the attraction I once felt now tempered by wariness. As I reflected, I tried to imagine the trajectory of our potential future together. Would he consult his mother before making a career decision, before committing to a serious relationship, before taking any significant step that involved both of us? The questions spiraled, each one more troubling than the last. I couldn't help but feel that if something as small as a hotel stay required approval, the larger, more consequential decisions would follow the same pattern. And the thought of building a life under those conditions felt suffocating. I also had to confront my own expectations and standards. I wanted a partner who could navigate life as an equal, someone capable of making choices with confidence and integrity. I wasn't looking for perfection, but I did need decisiveness, independence, and the ability to take responsibility for one's actions. His reliance on his mother suggested a gap in those qualities that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just inconvenient. It was incompatible with the kind of life I envisioned for myself and my child. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the ick wasn't just about him, it was about me, my boundaries, and the standards I was unwilling to compromise. I had worked hard to cultivate independence, resilience, and self-respect, and I couldn't allow someone else's inability to act autonomously to diminish that. It was a lesson in self-awareness, a reminder that attraction and connection are not substitutes for compatibility and shared values. I replayed our conversations, searching for other signs I might have missed. Had there been subtle hints of dependency before? Moments when he deferred to others unnecessarily or sought validation for simple choices? I realized there had been small things that at first seemed charming or quirky, but now appeared as early indicators of a pattern. It was like noticing the first cracks in a facade that had initially seemed flawless. The realization was both sobering and clarifying. Stripping away any illusions I had harbored about him, I also thought about my child and the example I wanted to set. Being a parent changes your perspective on relationships in profound ways. You begin to see beyond personal desire and consider the broader implications of who you choose to bring into your life. The qualities I valued weren't just for my sake. They were for the environment I wanted to create for my child. Dependence, indecision, and a lack of maturity were traits I couldn't risk exposing my child to. No matter how charming the person might be in fleeting moments, it became clear that I had to make a choice. Continue to invest in someone whose actions and values didn't align with my own, or step back and preserve my autonomy, boundaries, and emotional well-being. It wasn't easy, especially because there had been genuine moments of connection, laughter, and warmth. But I knew that the foundation of any lasting relationship isn't charm or chemistry, it's respect, independence, and the ability to navigate life as equals. I started to visualize a conversation with him, one that would require honesty, directness, and clarity. I didn't want to be cruel or dismissive. I wanted to communicate my feelings and boundaries in a way that was truthful and firm. I imagined telling him that while I appreciated our time together, the realization that he couldn't make independent decisions was incompatible with the life I wanted to lead. I pictured explaining that it wasn't about his love or care for me, but about the structural dynamic that made me uncomfortable and undermined my sense of equality in the relationship. Preparing for that conversation was emotional. There was a mixture of sadness, relief, and empowerment, a strange combination that made my chest feel simultaneously heavy and light. Sadness for the potential of what could have been, relief for recognizing the truth before deeper attachment developed, and empowerment in affirming my own needs and standards. It was a moment of reckoning, one that required me to confront both the man I had grown fond of and the woman I needed to protect myself and my child. As I moved forward, I realized that the ick wasn't a fleeting feeling, it was a catalyst for self-reflection and growth. It forced me to clarify my priorities, to recognize red flags that might have otherwise been overlooked, and to trust my instincts even when emotions complicated the picture. It taught me that attraction alone cannot sustain a relationship, and that the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths is a vital part of maintaining emotional integrity. In the end, I accepted that stepping back was not rejection for its own sake, but a necessary act of self-preservation and clarity. I didn't need to justify my feelings to anyone else, only to myself. I had experienced the highs of connection, the beauty of shared moments, and the thrill of early romance, but I also recognized the importance of boundaries, independence, and mutual respect. That recognition became my guiding principle, the lens through which I would evaluate all future relationships. The ick may have been uncomfortable, even jarring, but it was also illuminating. It reminded me that my values are non-negotiable, that my autonomy is sacred, and that love without equality and maturity is insufficient. It reshaped the way I approached connection, giving me the confidence to demand more from relationships while appreciating the moments of joy they can offer. It was a turning point of cinematic moment of clarity that transformed uncertainty into understanding, and confusion into empowered decision-making. Reflecting on the experience now, I see it as a lesson wrapped in discomfort. I don't regret the time spent with him, nor do I resent the charm and attentiveness he displayed early on. But I also recognize that recognizing the truth, even when it's difficult, is a form of courage. Walking away, setting boundaries, and honoring my own values isn't just about self-protection. It's about embracing the possibility of a relationship that is genuinely reciprocal, balanced, and fulfilling. And so, I move forward, carrying both the memories of connection and the lessons of clarity. I approach new beginnings with curiosity tempered by wisdom, with hope guided by experience, and with a renewed commitment to honor myself and my child in every decision I make. The ick has passed, but its impact lingers, shaping my choices, my perspective, and my understanding of what it truly means to engage with someone in a healthy, mature, and autonomous way.